Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are tackling a topic that might sound intensely academic, the realm of abstract theory, but which our sources insist is really foundational.
Foundational for strategic capacity, specifically for the modern military.
Exactly. We are diving deep into the necessity of integrating international relations theory, or IR theory, into professional military education PME.
And it's not just about, adding an extra course.
No, not at all. It's about making complex strategic thought a core required practical competency. The core premise is pretty stark, actually. An officer corps that is brilliant at maneuvering battalions or, say, flying aircraft.
Tactically excellent.
Right, tactically excellent, but maybe blind to the underlying political, economic, and normative environments they operate in.
That kind of leader is simply insufficient for the volatility we see today in the 21st century.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to understand why this intellectual foundation is now seen as, and the sources use this term, an operational enabler.
An operational enabler, that's a powerful phrase.
It is. And we'll look at how four major traditions of IR theory, realism, liberalism, constructivism, and critical approaches translate directly into concrete day-to-day strategic competencies.
Competencies needed for senior military leaders? Absolutely.
Yes.
And that framing, the necessity of it, that's critical. The primary concern articulated across these documents is this widespread risk of what they call strategic myopia.
Strategic myopia. Can you unpack that a bit?
Sure. It basically describes the danger of producing leaders who are, and I'm quoting here, tactically excellent but utterly unable to situate military action within its broader political context.
That distinction, tactical skill versus strategic relevance, that seems profoundly important.
It really is.
It suggests that if you don't grasp the political landscape, every battlefield success, no matter how decisive it seems,
Might just pave the way for long-term strategic failure. Yeah.
wow.
Precisely. And the sources argue pretty forcefully that integrating IR theory is, well, maybe the only effective solution to this myopia.
So it's not an academic luxury.
Definitely not. It's positioned as a practical and urgent requirement. This is about instilling disciplined, structured thinking.
So leaders understand, anticipate.
And operate within the complex political structures of the global arena, basically preventing them from acting in a strategic vacuum.
Okay, so let's start there. Why is this theoretical literacy suddenly so urgent? What exactly defines this modern operating environment that makes the old PME curriculum, well, obsolete?
Well, the contemporary context is, it's a messy convergence of several high-stakes dynamics.
Okay.
We're definitely seeing a rapid return to great power rivalry, particularly, in the Indo-Pacific.
Right.
At the same time, the lines between war and peace are getting fuzzier.
The whole gray zone conflict idea?
Exactly. Adversaries testing limits using cyber, economic pressure, influence ops, stuff below the threshold of declared war. Then you add transnational threats, climate change, pandemics, terrorist networks, things that don't fit neatly into state versus state security models.
And everything is amplified.
Everything is magnified by intense, instantaneous media scrutiny and, frankly, information warfare. It's constant.
So it sounds like military leaders aren't just managing physical fronts anymore.
Well, not at all.
They're managing political fronts, informational fronts, normative fronts, all at the same time.
They absolutely are. And this complexity really exposes the historical gap in professional military education.
How so?
Historically, PME centered almost exclusively on things like campaign history, logistics, established military doctrine.
Kind of the how-to of warfighting.
Pretty much. The underlying assumption was that strategic insight, that necessary political wisdom would just sort of emerge implicitly.
Through experience, through studying past battles.
Exactly. Through years of applied experience and studying military history.
But the sources argue that method is fundamentally no longer sufficient. Why did just looking at history stop being enough?
Well, because reviewing history primarily teaches you what happened, maybe how to execute a similar maneuver again. But it doesn't necessarily equip you with a robust framework for understanding the political motivations driving things today, or the systems that structure how states behave now.
Right, the underlying logic.
Yes. The core failure identified is that an overemphasis on tactical and operational skill, without that structured theoretical grounding, risks severing military action from its essential political purpose.
And when you sever military action from its political purpose, you violate the very foundation of strategic thought.
You got it.
You violate the Clausewitzian principle that war is a continuation of politics by other means.
That's the central strategic sin, as they frame it.
Mm.
If you win every tactical engagement, you clear the area, capture the target,
Right.
but you fail to account for the political context.
Fail strategically.
You commit strategic failure. Think about certain counterinsurgency campaigns. Maybe the military successfully defeated the immediate threat, but failed completely to anticipate the political vacuum that followed, or the global legitimacy crisis, or the shift in local identity that turned a supportive population into an antagonistic one.
That's strategic failure despite tactical excellence?
Precisely. And IR theory exists exactly to prevent that kind of severance.
So the theory itself isn't about memorizing dense textbooks. It's more like providing structured frameworks.
Yes, almost like intellectual toolkits for processing the chaos of international events.
Okay.
It provides the intellectual architecture. It equips officers with ways to think about foundational concepts, anarchy, sovereignty, intervention, cooperation, identity, in a structured, consistent, and critical way.
It's described as a disciplined effort to strengthen strategic judgment.
That's a key phrase from the material.
So what's the practical, observable payoff for an officer who has this theoretical literacy? What changes?
The payoff is highly practical, measurable in command competence. First, theoretical literacy lets officers communicate better with their civilian counterparts, the political leadership.
Because they speak the same language.
Essentially, yes. The shared language of political risk, power balance, global order. Second, it enables them to manage alliances far more effectively,
How so?
because they understand the partner's underlying political motivations, which might differ from their stated ones,
Okay. Reading between the lines.
A bit, yes. And maybe most critically, it allows them to anticipate the second and third order effects of military force.
Moving beyond the immediate tactical outcome.
Exactly. Beyond, did we hit the target, to how did hitting that target change the political dynamics of the region? What happens next?
That level of anticipatory thinking, that's really the definition of a strategic leader.
It is.
Okay, this sets the stage perfectly for the core of our discussion. We're going to look at 4 distinct theoretical traditions.
Right.
And the sources emphasize, importantly, that officers must view these not as rigid dogmas, but as flexible.
What does it call them?
Heuristic lenses.
Yeah, heuristic lenses, like different pairs of glasses you can put on.
You need to be able to rotate them constantly to get a full view of the strategic problem.
That concept of intellectual agility is paramount. Being fluent in these traditions helps officers instantly recognize the underlying theoretical assumptions.
Assumptions driving policy or adversary rhetoric?
Both. Assumptions driving policy decisions, justifying alliance narratives, or underpinning adversary rhetoric.
Yeah.
You can almost reverse engineer the strategy if you can identify the theory they're leaning on.
Fascinating. Okay, let's start with a tradition that seems to ground all military thought in, well, harsh reality. Realism.
Realism, yes. It's often seen as the tradition of strategic prudence. Its core focus rests on what it sees as enduring features of international politics, such as the international system being anarchic, meaning no world government. That power competition is inevitable, and that security is a constant struggle, often defined by the security dilemma.
Right.
This perspective essentially forces military professionals to have a disciplined appreciation for worst-case scenarios.
Can you elaborate on the foundational thinkers here? People like Morgenthau and Waltz. What's their core message for a modern military planner?
Certainly. You have classical realists like Hans Morgenthau, who emphasize that politics is governed by objective laws rooted in human nature, specifically the drive for power.
Okay.
Then you have more contemporary structural realists like Kenneth Waltz. They shifted the focus more to the international system itself.
And their core tenet.
It's pretty stark.
Yeah.
In an anarchic system, states must prioritize self-help. Your survival hinges on your ability to deploy credible force and manage the balance of power.
Because no one else is coming to save you.
Basically, yes. That's the core realist logic.
So if a military planner operates under that realist lens, what specific considerations really dominate their decision-making process?
Well, realism's military relevance is absolutely foundational. It demands hyper-attention to relative power balances.
Not just our power, but our power compared to theirs.
Exactly. Are we gaining power, or are they gaining power relative to us? It also forces a certain skepticism about alliance reliability.
Why skepticism?
Because a realist officer understands alliances as temporary arrangements of convenience driven by converging interests, not permanent relationships based on, say, shared democratic values.
So the moment interests diverge.
The alliance is at risk. That's the realist calculation.
That concept of the security dilemma feels particularly relevant today, especially with high-stakes military signaling. How does realism inform that?
The security dilemma is a cornerstone. It suggests that defensive measures taken by one state are often seen as offensive threats by another.
Leading to arms races or escalation.
Exactly. Even if neither side actually wants conflict. So a realist officer has to plan their naval maneuvers, their troop deployments, their weapons buys, not just for effectiveness.
But for the signal they send.
Precisely. For the signal they send to the adversary. Are we clearly conveying deterrence, or are we accidentally triggering a spiral of escalation?
That seems vital in places like the South China Sea or with nuclear issues.
Absolutely critical. Misperception can be catastrophic in those environments.
So this lens acts as a necessary counterweight to maybe wishful thinking. It warns against projecting our own benign intentions onto competitors.
Precisely. A realist lens warns officers against that comforting assumption that, shared values or economic interdependence or international law will automatically override core security interests.
Especially when those interests are seen as existential.
Yes. This is essential for interpreting the behavior of revisionist states, or states using those subtle gray zone tactics.
Tactics designed to test limits without triggering outright war.
Right. They're often acting on core self-help principles, and the realist officer needs to recognize that underlying logic.
So in PME, realism justifies focused study on the mechanics of power, not just, say, the ethics of power.
It absolutely justifies dedicated, focused study on balance of power politics, deterrence theory, both conventional and nuclear, and strategic stability. It's the anchor.
An anchor for planning and managing risk.
Exactly. It ensures an officer understands how to plan, how to signal intent clearly under pressure, and how to manage risk under conditions of severe strategic uncertainty. When you're managing a crisis, you need that cold, sometimes zero-sum realist framework to anchor your assessment.
Okay, let's rotate the lens now. Let's move to liberalism. If realism is about distrust, scarcity, and power, liberalism must introduce something else: cooperation.
That's the critical contrast, yes. Liberalism shifts the focus. It moves away from simple state versus state power struggles.
Towards what?
Towards the role of international institutions, economic interdependence, and even the nature of domestic politics in mitigating conflict and enabling cooperation.
And this perspective is vital because modern military operations are rarely done alone.
Almost never. They are almost always multinational.
So what are the central tenets here, and who are the key thinkers that guide military understanding in this area?
Well, thinkers like Robert Keown are central to understanding modern institutional liberalism. The core idea is that anarchy, while real,
it can be managed.
it can be profoundly mitigated by shared rules, norms, and formal international organizations. Think the UN, NATO, the WTO, regional bodies like ASEAN.
And how do these institutions help?
They structure state expectations, they provide mechanisms for transparency, monitoring, and crucially, they reduce the transaction costs of cooperation.
Making it easier to work together and harder to cheat.
That's the idea.
How does that perspective translate directly to military operations? Can you give us a concrete example of an operational variable that a liberal framework really brings into focus?
Oh, it's highly relevant to pretty much every aspect of modern deployment. Alliance management, coalition warfare, any mission operating under an explicit international mandate, like from the UN Security Council.
Okay.
Liberalism underscores that operational variables are not just about firepower or combat effectiveness. They include things like legitimacy.
Legitimacy in the eyes of the world.
Yes, and adherence to international legal frameworks, interoperability with partners, burden sharing within the coalition.
So a commander needs to worry about more than just the fight.
Absolutely. A liberal-informed commander knows they might have the perfect operational plan, technically speaking. But if they violate the UN mandate underpinning their mission,
Then what?
then the political support, the legitimacy, and often the crucial contributions from coalition partners could just evaporate. Poof.
So this is how abstract political ideas like multilateralism and legitimacy become concrete operational constraints.
Exactly. The commander has to manage them. The maintenance of the coalition itself becomes an operational task.
Military action viewed through the lens of institutional rules.
Precisely. So in PME, this justifies dedicated modules on coalition warfare protocols, the detailed procedures for interoperability, both technical and command structure related, And, critically, the politics behind getting and keeping mandates.
Equipping officers to work in those complex multinational commands.
Yes, and to understand that failing to secure political buy-in is just as dangerous, potentially, as failing on the battlefield. It's about fighting effectively within the agreed-upon rules of the road.
Okay, moving on. We come to a perspective that seems to challenge the very solidity of those rules. Constructivism.
Yes.
This is where we shift from physical power, like in realism and institutional structure in liberalism, to something different. The battle space of meaning and identity.
That's a great way to put it. Constructivism is perhaps the most intellectually demanding shift for those trained strictly in physical objective metrics. But it's indispensable for modern conflict.
What, indispensable?
Its core focus is that interests, identities, and critically threats are not inherent or fixed just by material capability, like how many tanks someone has.
So they aren't objective facts.
Constructivists argue they are socially constructed, built through interaction, shared history, discourse, language.
This brings us to that famous quote by Alexander Wen. Anarchy is what states make of it. What does that actually mean for an officer deploying troops?
It means that while the international system might lack a central authority that's anarchy, the character of that anarchy isn't fixed.
So it could be hostile or cooperative.
Exactly. Whether it's a va-the-end, a war of all against all, or lock-in, more like rules-based rivalry, is determined by the shared ideas, norms, and expectations that states have built up over time.
And for the deployed officer?
For a deployed officer, it means recognizing that a military movement interpreted as aggression by one group
Might be seen differently by another.
might be interpreted as reassurance by another group, based entirely on the history and the identity that has been constructed between them. It's about perception shaped by identity.
This sounds like the theory that most directly links things like information warfare, psych ops, and strategic communications into core military planning.
Absolutely. This lens is crucial for counterinsurgency, stabilization missions, and yes, strategic communications or influence operations.
Why is it so crucial there?
Constructivism emphasizes that military actions do not stand alone. They produce meaning. They send messages, whether intended or not.
Okay.
The same tactical act, let's say, a precise airstrike targeting a known terrorist leader, can be perceived and framed by locals as liberation or justice.
If the narrative is managed well.
Right. If the operational narrative connects with local values and identities, or that same act can be framed as indifference to civilian life or foreign occupation if the narrative is lost or mishandled.
The sources mention that success hinges on understanding how meaning-making can amplify or undermine the tactical effects of force. Can you elaborate on that feedback loop? It sounds critical.
Sure. Take a counterinsurgency operation again. A military unit provides humanitarian aid, food, medicine. That's a tactical action.
Yeah, that seems positive.
But if the local population interprets that action as, say, a cynical attempt to gain temporary favor before inevitable withdrawal, maybe based on past historical grievances or broken promises,
Then the action fails strategically.
exactly. The tactical effect, food delivered, is completely undermined by the constructed meaning. It's seen as cynical manipulation. The constructivist approach teaches officers they must manage the narrative and understand local identity of the story as carefully as they manage logistics or firefights.
So they need to analyze symbols, language, uniforms.
Yes, all of it. They have to analyze the symbolism of their presence, their equipment, their language, their interactions.
Therefore, PME, using this lens, must support deep examination of local narratives, symbolism, ethical framing, making officers culturally fluent.
That's the requirement. It requires seminars, case studies focusing on media perception, the rapid spread of misinformation, how adversaries exploit existing social identities to mobilize resistance. The officer has to become a student of social dynamics, not just military dynamics.
Okay. Finally, we come to the fourth major tradition, critical and reflexive approaches. This sounds different again. It seems to demand scrutiny of the military enterprise itself.
That is correct. This tradition encompasses things like feminist IR, post-colonial theory, critical security studies, shifts the focus away from just the state,
Towards what then?
towards global hierarchies,
Yeah.
race, class, gender, and the structures of global power that often determine whose security gets prioritized and, frankly, whose suffering gets ignored.
That brings us to scholar Robert Cox's powerful assertion. Theory is always for someone and for some purpose.
That quote is loaded, isn't it?
It really is. It suggests that military planning, even if done under the guise of realist self-help or liberal rule following, is inherently biased in some way.
That's the challenge it poses, yes. How does that level of self-reflection become a practical military requirement for, say, a commanding officer?
Yes, how?
It becomes practical because it's essential for anticipating political backlash, securing long-term legitimacy, and reinforcing democratic accountability.
So it's about avoiding unintended consequences.
Partly. Critical approaches force officers to reflect on how military force, even when deployed with the best intentions protection, stability can inadvertently reproduce or even worsen existing structural inequalities, or reinforce problematic colonial legacies.
Can you ground that in a specific military scenario? How does understanding structural inequality affect maybe peace operations planning?
Absolutely. Consider a stabilization mission. If the mission design inadvertently channels power and resources primarily into the hands of a pre-existing elite, maybe a male-dominated group, or an ethnically privileged local structure, then the mission, even if it achieves some kind of tactical stability in the short term, might actually violate its own stated goals of creating inclusive governance or lasting peace.
Because it reinforces the old, unequal system.
Exactly. The critical lens cultivates ethical awareness and cultural sensitivity by forcing the officer to ask tough questions. Who benefits most from our presence here? Whose security are we really prioritizing right now? And what are the unintended ripple effects of our actions on the most vulnerable groups in this society?
This sounds like it goes way beyond just following the Geneva Conventions.
It does. It's about anticipating the deeper societal and political consequences of intervention, not just the immediate legal ones.
It seems to enhance the military's ethical and legal posture quite dramatically.
We think so. Engaging with these lenses encourages intense scrutiny of the military's own assumptions, its own biases, its operational practices. This is vital for maintaining the moral authority of the armed forces, particularly in a democracy where intervention decisions face intense political and public debate.
And what are the necessary PME curriculum outcomes here? What kind of difficult but necessary debates does this framework encourage?
Well, it provides the intellectual structure for deep, necessary debates on really crucial topics. Things like detailed analysis of civilian harm mitigation strategies beyond just legal compliance, understanding the politics of intervention whose interests are truly being served, navigating the ethical landscape of post-colonial legacies in peace operations.
It's about building leaders who are ethically informed.
And politically sophisticated enough to handle the inevitable public scrutiny and complexity.
Okay, so let's quickly bring these four lenses back into focus. Realism gives us that disciplined appreciation for power, risk, security dilemmas.
Right. The hard truths.
Liberalism provides the blueprint for cooperation, institutions, coalition management.
The rules and partnerships.
Constructivism defines that critical battle space of identity, legitimacy, meaning.
How things are perceived and understood.
And the critical approaches provide the necessary self-reflection to ensure operations are accountable and ethically grounded.
Checking our own assumptions and impacts.
And the key is that the officer must use all four, maybe shifting between them.
Exactly. Mastering this suite of traditions ensures the officer is never reliant on a single, simplistic way of explaining the world. They learn to interpret the deep structures of world politics dynamically. That's true intellectual agility.
Recognizing the intellectual value is step one, but the sources provide a pretty detailed roadmap for implementation, don't they? For translating this conceptual rigor into actual military training and PME system design.
Yes, and this is where the practical requirement really materializes.
The transition to implementation.
It's paramount. The challenge isn't just knowing the theories, it's weaving them into the actual curriculum, architecture, and teaching methods so they become functional tools, not just abstract knowledge stored away somewhere.
Let's start with curriculum architecture and integrated learning. How do you ensure theory isn't just stuck in one forgettable, isolated course early on?
Yeah, the check-the-box approach doesn't work. The documents insist theory must be embedded vertically and horizontally across the entire curriculum.
Horizontally and vertically. What does that mean in practice?
Horizontally means the concepts aren't just taught in, say, the strategy department. Concepts from realism and liberalism should also appear and be applied in courses on logistics, force management, even military law.
Showing how political assumptions constrain technical decisions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Linking the political to the practical across domains. And vertically means progressive learning.
So it builds over time.
Precisely. The curriculum needs to be deliberately sequenced throughout an officer's career. Foundational concepts, maybe the difference between classical and structural realism, or the function of regimes and liberalism, are introduced at the entry level, say for captains or majors.
And then as they progress to higher ranks?
As they progress to intermediate and senior levels, Lieutenant colonels, future generals, those same concepts are revisited, but through increasingly complex applied problems.
Can you give an example?
Sure. A senior level class doesn't just read about deterrence theory again. They might be tasked with designing a multinational cyber deterrence strategy against an advanced peer competitor.
Okay, that's complex.
And the key is they'd be required to explicitly draw on both realist assumptions about power signaling and liberal assumptions about coalition cohesion and institutional responses to justify their plan.
Ah, I see. Integrating the lenses.
Yeah.
This structure leads directly to the core assessment component the sources talk about, theory-based assessment.
Yes.
How do you test theoretical literacy in a way that proves practical application, not just, memorizing definitions?
You make the theory the necessary justification for the operational recommendation. Assessments must require officers to justify their plans, whether it's force posture, a comm strategy, an intervention approach, explicitly in light of theoretical assumptions.
Well, the goal being.
The goal is to make clear that theory is integral to reasoning rather than ornamental. It's not just fancy window dressing. It's part of the logical structure of the recommendation.
Could you walk us through what a senior level assessment prompt might look like under this kind of model?
Certainly. Instead of just an essay asking, should we intervene in country X, the prompt would be more demanding.
How
It might demand something like, analyze the current crisis in country X using two distinct IR lenses, say, institutional liberalism and post-colonial critical theory. Justify your final policy recommendation, intervention, sanctions, diplomatic restraint, etc., by explicitly articulating which theoretical framework yields the most actionable and strategically sustainable lessons for a modern democratic military operating in this context.
Wow, that really forces them to connect the dots.
It forces the officer to demonstrate not only what they know about the theories, but how they think using them. They can't just hide behind tactical jargon. They have to connect their decision to a structured understanding of world politics.
Creating traceable pathways from abstract concept to concrete competency.
Precisely. It links intellectual rigor directly to professional responsibility and judgment, the kind expected of a flag officer.
That rigorous assessment design naturally leads us to the teaching methods needed to actually deliver this. How do you turn these sometimes abstract concepts into dynamic practice that someone remembers under pressure?
Right, it can't just be lectures. The methods have to be interactive. They need to move the theory off the static page and into, say, the simulation room. 3 methods are highlighted as particularly effective.
Which are?
Wargaming, complex case studies, and theory-grounded red teaming.
Okay, wargaming and crisis simulations sound like the perfect environment to stress test these theoretical assumptions in a safe space.
They are arguably the most powerful tool for this. War games allow officers to inhabit the roles of different actors, maybe an adversary operating under realist assumptions, a cautious ally focused on liberal institutional rules, or even a non-state actor driven by constructivist identity politics.
And they see the results in real time.
Yes, they watch in real time how their assigned theoretical assumptions drive divergent choices, create misperceptions, and maybe lead to crisis escalation or de-escalation.
Can you illustrate that?
Sure. Imagine a war game focused on maritime competition. One team might be mandated to operate under strict neo-realist assumptions, prioritize relative military power, ignore international institutions unless useful. The opposing team might be forced to adopt a liberal framework focused on leveraging economic interdependence, call emergency sessions of treaty organizations, emphasize international law.
And by playing it out.
By observing the outcomes, officers immediately see how a purely realist strategy might, say, instantly create a security dilemma and alienate potential allies, something the liberal actor might have predicted but the realist actor dismissed. Or vice versa, how a purely liberal approach might fail against ruthless power politics.
That practical experience would drive home the conceptual point far better than just reading about it.
Absolutely. And how do case studies ground this in history? Which cases are best for demonstrating the utility of using multiple lenses? Good question. Case studies are essential for contextualizing the theories in real-world events. Seminars should be built around complex historical or contemporary conflicts. The Cuban Missile Crisis is a classic, the collapse of Yugoslavia, the Iraq War, or contemporary flashpoints like the Indo-Pacific.
And the instructor's role.
The instructor's role is crucial. It's to structure the analysis, demanding that students apply the different lenses sequentially to the same case.
How would that work with, say, the Cuban Missile Crisis?
Okay, analyzing it through a realist lens, highlights the absolute importance of the relative military balance, the credibility of nuclear threats, series of influence.
Makes sense.
Analyzing the same crisis through a liberal lens focuses attention on the role of institutional diplomacy, the UN back-channel communication, Kennedy and Khrushchev pulling back from the brink, perhaps due to shared norms against nuclear war.
Okay, different factors emphasized.
And then, analyzing it through a constructivist lens, examines the shifting identities us versus them during the crisis, how propaganda shaped perceptions, and how maybe mutually understood norms, like the sanctity of the adversary's capital city, prevented escalation beyond Cuba itself.
So different lenses reveal distinct causal mechanisms and policy risks within the same event.
Exactly. It prevents the officer from relying on a single, simplistic historical narrative, like it was all about nukes. It shows the complexity.
That intellectual process forces officers to look beyond just the immediate tactical events.
And analyze the underlying strategic miscalculations, which often stem from a failure to appreciate these different theoretical dynamics. A theoretical failure, essentially.
And finally, we have red teaming. This sounds like the ultimate test of intellectual agility, breaking out of your own assumptions.
It really is. Designed to break cognitive rigidity.
How does grounding a red team exercise in IR theory change the quality and the outcome of that assessment? What's different?
Standard red teaming encourages officers to think like adversaries or partners. But if you explicitly ground that exercise in IR theory,
What happens?
you force the red team to adopt the specific threat perceptions and normative frames of the actor they're portraying, rather than just acting like a generic rational utility maximizer based on Western assumptions.
Can you give an example of that?
For instance, if the adversary being simulated is a state deeply invested in a constructivist narrative of historical grievance, national sovereignty, and maybe post-colonial dignity,
Okay.
your red team must act according to those constructed norms and identities.
Okay.
They might prioritize actions that achieve political humiliation of a foreign military over capturing a piece of territory, if that fits their identity narrative.
That's a very different kind of rationality.
It absolutely is, and experiencing that broadens the assessing officer's appreciation for alternative motivations. It transforms theory from just static reading into dynamic anticipatory practice. You start thinking how they think.
The quality of strategic assessment must improve vastly then.
Because the officers are forced to shed their own default theoretical assumptions and truly try to inhabit the mindset of the other.
That recognition that the world isn't just a stage for your strategy, but a collection of actors operating under different, possibly equally rational, strategic frameworks.
That recognition is the essence of strategic literacy.
We've covered a tremendous amount of ground here. We've gone from defining strategic myopia all the way through to the specific design of theory-based wargaming assessments.
It's quite a comprehensive vision laid out in these sources.
So let's try to synthesize the central argument for everyone listening. IR theory, fundamentally, furnishes officers with robust interpretive tools essential for navigating a highly volatile, interconnected, and contested international system.
It's about building that intellectual agility at the highest levels of command.
And the strategic payoff.
The strategic payoff, the sources argue, is clear and vital to national security. A theoretically informed officer corps is simply better equipped in every domain.
Better equipped how?
They're better able to understand adversaries because they can grasp their underlying assumptions. They can sustain complex alliances better because they understand the political and institutional constraints and motivations of partners.
They safeguard legitimacy.
They're better able to safeguard legitimacy because they understand how meaning is constructed on the ground, how actions are perceived. And ultimately, they align military operations with coherent political objectives.
Preventing that catastrophic Clausewitzian violation we talked about right at the beginning.
Exactly. Avoiding tactical success that leads to strategic failure.
The sources are really unequivocal about the risk of neglect, aren't they? They frame this theoretical integration as a necessity, not just a nice-to-have refinement.
They absolutely call it a foundational necessity. Neglecting this intellectual foundation risks producing leaders who might excel at fighting battles, but who inevitably misread the strategic environment. And that misreading can lead to, and again I'm quoting, grave consequences for national policy.
And in a democracy, that failure translates into
wasted resources, lost lives, undermined political trust, both domestically and internationally. The stakes are incredibly high.
So by embracing IR theory as a substantive foundation for strategic judgment,
Professional military education systems enhance both operational effectiveness and they help ensure the responsible exercise of military power, which is crucial in what is undeniably a contested global order.
It's about more than just competence.
It's about ensuring moral authority and democratic accountability as well.
You know, if these complex frameworks are necessary to inform military command, which, as you say, has life and death consequences, then they seem just as vital for us, the listeners, as we try to make sense of international news and global crises every day.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah.
And it raises a critical final question, perhaps, for you, the listener. You now understand these four main heuristic lenses: realism, liberalism, constructivism, and the critical approaches. So the next time you encounter a major international crisis, maybe a diplomatic standoff, a trade war, a limited military intervention, which underlying theoretical assumption about how the world works, about global order, will you rely on to interpret those events and judge the policy response?
Because we all use one, implicitly.
Exactly. Whether you realize it or not, you are likely choosing one of those powerful strategic frameworks to make sense of it all right now. Which one is it?
Compelling and necessary challenge to end on. Thank you for guiding us through this really essential deep dive into the intellectual foundations of modern leadership.